Welcome to the Ingredients for Success podcast. I'm your host, Jackie Rizzo, and on today's show, I have the honor of chatting with Brandon Griffin, CEO of REJIMUS Incorporated. Brandon holds a degree in genetics and plant biology from UC Berkeley and spearheads the overall growth and direction of the company, as well as its online regulatory service solution development initiatives. He brings over 2 decades of wide-ranging experience throughout the food, dietary supplement, and pharmaceutical development sectors to the table. With expertise in sales, leadership, and modeling, transition management, and operational optimization, and strategic planning expertise for FDA-regulated markets. Welcome to the show, Brandon.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, well, I am super excited to have you on the show today because as a marketer in this industry, I do understand the importance to keep up with all things FDA related, but sometimes we're not really in the mix quite as much as you are. So I'm looking forward to the insights you'll bring today.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So where do you think the FDA should focus their attention with respect to enforcing the regulations within the food or dietary industry?
You know, there's a rather wide debate going on in terms of how the FDA should enforce the regulations. They have quite a bit of sort of they have quite a bit of resources already at their disposal in terms and laws that they can readily apply to various businesses throughout the respective supply chains, whether we're talking food, supplements, cosmetics, etc. And one of the areas we tend to see a major gap in is really early on and in the industry, and that kind of gets into the ingredient phase and the ingredient development. But there's areas in claims that they can more readily enforce. There's areas in operational compliance whereby you often see warning letters getting issued, but they are quite slow to react with more either application of fines or court actions or things along those lines. And so often there's a when we see a lot of new companies and individuals that are starting in the industry for the first time, they still think that the FDA doesn't regulate, for example, supplements. And so we do a lot of upfront education, with them, going, no, they definitely are, but don't mistake the lack of enforcement, or at least that you see, for the fact that there's no, for taking that as there's no regulations, there's no laws in place. I give the analogy quite often. It's like a stop sign. You can pull up to a stop sign often, California rolling stop, or people go through it. It's not until there's actually somebody there who catches you, i.e. a police officer, that will enforce the law that you're not supposed to break in. And if the law is enforced, appropriately by way of penalties and fines and things like that, you hopefully have a deterrent effect. And I think within the pharma and med device space, there is considerable deterrent effects for folks to operate in the compliance spectrum that applies to those particular products or ingredients. It's less so in the food and supplement space. What we often see is it's only you tend to see a prioritization of efforts of enforcing the regulations when someone's getting sick or hurt right away, rather than all the other mechanisms for which a client should be complying well before a product or ingredient gets to market that's potentially contaminated or adulterated or whatever that may render harm to somebody.
So if you were heading up the division of the FDA responsible for cleaning up the industry, what would be the top 2 or 3 things you'd enact to get immediate results?
I'd start with where the process of which ingredients are being brought to market. Right now we have a finalized guidance with respect to grass, and yet there is a ever looming NDI guidance that, quite honestly, from our perspective, is still very convoluted. We've identified conflicting, if you will, conflicting parts, even within a notification, that don't quite make sense. And so cutting through all of that and going, okay, what is the really intended purpose of this? Why should we have it? And making clear what those parts are without a type of overreach in what the intended purpose of these ingredients are. it would be a key area, have a more expeditious, approach to defining the regulations and then implementing them. The delay of a revised guidance with no end in sight is quite detrimental to the industry, in our opinion. That's definitely one area. Another one is, again, going back to, the kind of the quintessential examples of FDA enforcement is with the issuance of 483s and warning letters. Mm-hmm. Enforce them, not just warn them, not just issue pieces of paper, but go through and enact, if there's penalties that can be applied, apply them. If there are more specific actions that should be taken, and whether or not those should be in a legal setting, start it. We often see, years after prolonged non-compliance matters, for the agency to really take get a legal foothold around the company, and even then, it still doesn't fully dissuade a lot of these brands, and then that kind of contributes to a lot of the perception of bad actors in the industry, and the kind of the scapegoated bad actors in the industry. There's a lot of good companies in the industry that simply just don't have all of their compliance in place because they don't prioritize it, because they're trying to make money, they're trying to grow a brand. I get that, but that's not an excuse. And it's often when something goes wrong that they then take more proactive, or reactive steps rather, to correct the problem. But are they doing it out of really commitment to the brand, commitment to quality, commitment to safety to consumers? No, they're doing it out of necessity to avoid future legal scrutiny, or having to file additional insurance claims on their products or against their brand, or whatever may happen. Another area is in regards to, and along those same lines, one of the claims is or FDA enforcement is with claims. I think there could be a more significant outreach from the agency to educate, brand owners around the types of claims and that they can. Again, yes, the guidance there, but it's very convoluted, and quite honestly, it's a good bit boring. so there's often, not everyone, really wants to understand all the regulations, or they want it to be kind of spoon fed to them. It's an opportunity for a lot of trade organizations to take an educational approach and provide forums for that. But even those are significantly limited, and the value is not immediately made known, or just, it's not been communicated effectively, I think, across the industry, for either small brand owners or up and coming brand owners trying to get into the space that have limited budgets. If they don't have $1 million, they don't even have $10,000. They just have an idea, and they can spend a couple $1,000 to get a few hundred or a few thousand units made, and they can put together a website, and suddenly they've got the opportunity to create a brand and drive a revenue source. And quality is often a afterthought, and we see that message most prominently. I would say we see that message a lot from contract laboratories in the industry, talking about testing and quality and all those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm. In the beginning, you had mentioned about finalization of the guidance in respect to GRAS. Can you describe more about that process and why it is important for companies?
Sure. So the GRAS guidance actually has already been finalized. Rather, I was referring to the new dietary ingredient notification. I think right now there's, I believe it was in late 2016, if I'm not mistaken, where the draft guidance, most recent draft guidance was issued. And at least our interactions with the agency and the group that handles these types of notifications has approached each review fairly consistently. So even though there's just, there's currently draft guidance that adheres to, the definition of what what we're calling now a new dietary ingredient dossier, no longer a master file, entails, what often happens, and this kind of leads into these stories and metrics around very high rejection rates. is a lot of individuals interpreting the needs and essentials of either a GRAS dossier or an NDI dossier, and putting together, quite honestly, very sloppy packages. And so oftentimes they'll either lean on other ingredients in the marketplace and try and draw a very limited example, or they won't. Going back to the quality comment I had earlier, they won't invest in the necessary testing to ensure the consistency of their finished ingredient and how it was made and what it came from. And so by not doing that, by not having that, by not controlling that well enough, all the other subsequent studies, all the other subsequent data is quite honestly questionable. And we see that a lot.
Yeah, yeah. And then again, you had mentioned about, new businesses popping up and their budget may not be, very robust in order to get the necessary items in place, such as, quality and to know the claims and actually to be educated in that. But what are the easiest things a virtual company, because we see them now popping outside of COVID, we're now removed from that just a little bit, and companies are kind of popping up all over, virtual companies, especially in our industry. So what are the easiest things that they can do that, that they outsource everything and they can do better to ensure their overall compliance and quality of their products?
So one key area, first and foremost, understand that the environment, the market that you are entering, the one that is entered, is regulated, and just assume it's regulated from top to bottom. And then with that mindset, I hope comes one of a seeking of understanding, a sort of awareness that there is more to do. And with that mindset, you can approach either resources for education like training and seminars. You can approach your vendors like contract manufacturers. You can approach consulting groups like REJIMUS with a more open-ended mindset and approach to going, okay, am I doing the right thing? Am I covering all my bases? Am I doing the essentials? Am I doing more than what's required? And really challenging oneself to go through that process. And because there's still such a, specifically around the dietary supplement space, but there's such a low barrier to entry. A lot of individuals are always kind of, again, quality is kind of a secondary nature or an afterthought. They can get in there, they can launch a site, a brand, and make a whole bunch of money. And we know this because we see, small companies literally in the already millions of dollars of space having no procedures, have never even audited their manufacturers or vendors. They've kind of gotten product complaints, but they don't really investigate them or handle them. And so they don't understand what risk is looming until quite often it's too late. And there's really two buckets of risk. There's legal risk, from a civil setting, and we see that often with claims and class actions around damages and things like that. And of course, products not being tested and contaminated, adulterated. And then the other one is regulatory. And regulatory actions, which are quite honestly more slow moving, but you've got both critical agencies involved in this, which is FDA and FTC are the two primary regulatory federal regulatory agencies that enforce those laws. There's also a good bit of USDA now with organic claims, and even now the bioengineered disclosure requirements. So I think across the board, starting with that mindset, looking to, be able to ask questions. I think quite often we worked with a couple companies that already had other consultants in the mix. And what was really interesting was a lot of these folks are like, well, they told us not to question them. They told them we're the area expert. No, you should question them, and they should be completely open with you about what they know and don't know and what the issue is. And by essentially shutting down the brand owner or dismissing them in the process, you do not only, I think, the individual disservice who's trying to render the guidance, but also, as the industry too large, the brand owner is going to be like, okay, well, I better not ask a question because I'm not supposed to know this, or, I don't want to appear dumb. Ask the questions, question everything, but at the same time, listen and make sure you pay attention. And what we often also see is, folks that will want to question everything, but they're not doing it because of, a way of wanting to learn, but they're doing it as a way of trying to see if there's a back door or a way out or a way around, not having to do a test or not having to submit a particular notification. And so, again, there's a lot of education in what we do. I think this forum is a great mechanism for people to get a little bit more educated. And then as their, brand gets a foothold and starts to grow, don't lose that mindset, because the business evolves, the industry is continuously evolving. The scientific challenges, meaning, how ingredients are made, what they do, those continuously evolve and happen. And surrounding yourself with partners or vendors or individuals that have a more open dialogue and a common mindset of wanting to teach and support is ever so critical.
Mm-hmm. How would you go about if you were a new company then at the very beginning? So you approach the research, you're asking questions, but sometimes you don't really know what questions to ask and you are listening. What would be the best way that they could easily surround themselves around other vendors and regulators to be able to gain that, that knowledge in order to execute their product effectively and accordingly?
So I'd say there's a couple areas. One, the most obvious ones are, any major organizational trade show. If you're in the food space, do a simple Google search about, trade shows, food, and you can see a wide variety of them. Obviously, we've got Supply Side West coming up. It's one of the biggest, if not the biggest, dietary supplement focused industry trade show here in the States. And it's just, you can get lost in the amount of training seminars that are offered, let alone just the discussions you'd have with a multitude of vendors, since we're going to be hosting there as well. I think leveraging those forums, leveraging or becoming involved in one or more trade organizations. Different organizations have different focuses, I would say. Some cover and overlap quite a bit, but not all organizations, quite honestly, are fit for every single person or company. But it's wonderful for them to have multiple options and attend a couple of their workshops, whether online or in person, and really get to know who's in this community and know that there are these different aspects. There's different folks involved in sales and marketing. There's different folks involved in research and development and formulation work. There's different folks involved in quality and regulatory. There's all these different aspects of the industry that are critical to, again, having that just general awareness of what's going on and building that network. And that can be done on LinkedIn, that can be done at a trade show, that can be done in an individual workshop. I think another critical one also is, again, linking into forums like this that are really geared towards, providing an educational resource, but also any of the major, editorial resources that are online, NutriIngredients, in pretty much any of the Informa online subscriptions really, cover current events. I think all of them in general do a very good job to cover, more current events, to really tell a story both of successes but also failures. And they highlight a lot of really prominent attorneys and experts in the space to contribute perspective. And so having a feed into those, or just literally just adding, getting them added to the news list and getting notifications of those in their feed, once a week or once a day, to see a topic that pops up, to become aware of a new ingredient that's come to market, to quite honestly, learn about someone else's failures by way of a warning letter, what not to do. And actually, in fact, FDA does a pretty darn good job publishing things like warning letters and recalls and other events. And they've got, very easy to subscribe to those and get those notices. They can be a little overwhelming, but you can set those up as a feed, whether it's, if you're using a Gmail account or even your regular one, and filter that through for keywords or key ingredients, or even something unique to your brand that would pop up in your feed before you may even have a chance to find it on your own. So I think there's a couple of great mechanisms to get involved with, and that would just help to, stave off other potential issues, so you don't suddenly get slapped with a lawsuit and go, well, what is this all about? Well, is it in the space? Is it a Prop 65 issue? Is it a PDCAS issue? Is it a claim issue? Is it another issue dealing with, recall? Is it an issue of, FDA expanding their advisory list of advisory list on ingredients that they don't like and don't feel it should be in dietary supplement products? If you're using those ingredients, if you are making those claims, if you have products that are in the kind of the hot button areas that the agency is tending to focus on, all of that awareness gives you a little bit more collective insight to hopefully not only having a successful brand and company, but avoiding those massive pitfalls that can set companies back considerably.
Thank you. That's extremely helpful. In May 2022, FDA issued an update to the guidance regarding new dietary ingredients requiring notification. What is your take on this, and when do you think it will go into effect? What do you think the impact on the industry will be?
So we all read that and we were like, oh man, like okay, the FDA is getting serious, but when? are we a year out? Are we a month out? What is it? I think I want to think that within a year from now, or from then, so by May of next year or middle of next year, I would like to think that the FDA actually takes action and makes an example or two of what is already at it, within its disposal, regulatory disposal and ability and law to enforce. And if they notice that, according to their assessments, that a couple thousand ingredients, what they consider new dietary ingredients, require notification, but haven't been notified, okay, what are you going to do about it? To date, we are not aware of any ingredient that the agency has essentially forced a recall on because it's not gone through the appropriate notification process. And yet we've firsthand seen a number of ingredients where, like, okay, this is either flat out disallowed, or we know it requires a notification, but because of this, again, uneven enforcement or lack of enforcement in particular areas, you get companies that tend to run first and, you kind of ask for forgiveness later. But by the time it's later, they've already made, $50 million or $100 million or $10 million, whatever it is. They've already made a lot of money. No one develops a novel ingredient to make a couple $1,000 or even a couple $100,000. The longevity and lifestyle of the product should be significant, and it's just a matter of, where it fits within the marketplace and the associated technology around, how it's made and how it can scale. With all that said, if the FDA has apparently this list, well, what's attached to that list are companies, and whether the FDA has actually inspected those companies and what data they have is going to be really, really interesting to see how they roll this out. My hope is that you suddenly, one, the guidance is finalized for NDIs appropriately. Two, the FDA with their current ability does enforce the regulations as such, and they don't have to have a one for one type of resource, meaning one agent for one ingredient. That wouldn't be very practical or cost effective. But there are, just as we evaluate ingredients for their regulatory status very early on in the process, it doesn't take much time to do that. So they can appropriately staff, the agency to be able to adequately do these reviews, or at least initial evaluations, and put certain companies on notice that they have, apparent concerns about. But they must finalize that guidance, the updated guidance. And in doing so, you'll give much clearer direction and honestly confidence in not only throughout the supply chain, but as individuals and hopefully brand owners and consumers alike, that the agency is doing what they're there to do, ensure the safety of products and ingredients to consumers. Beyond that, ultimately, we hope it's going to be a wake-up call, because if effectively, if they've determined a particular ingredient is, requires notification, it has been, and it's disallowed, the implications could be significant. If somebody's been selling an ingredient in the marketplace incorrectly for the last 5-10 years, quite honestly, that any finished products that ingredient went into could be subject to recall. I mean, we could be facing significant, massive recalls. So I would definitely advise, brand owners to brush up on making sure they've got, a recall provision. I hate to say it, but a recall provision in their insurance policy at a minimum.
Thank you so much. This conversation has been truly, it's been enlightening, and you have just given us a deep well of insight into all things, FDA and even in this industry, what we can do to be better. You have just given tips that I know that we have wanted to hear on our podcast, and I know that our audience is going to benefit from greatly. So thank you, Brandon, so much for coming on the show.
Well, no, I really appreciate, again, the opportunity. You guys have a great forum, and I think ultimately, it starts from the top down, and a commitment to, how you develop, what responsibilities you guys take, and your brand takes within the industry, how you contribute that information and resources back to customers. And it's a tremendously valuable platform and educational resource. So continue on, continue doing it.
We will. Thank you so much, Brandon. And hopefully we can catch up at Supply Side West. Please look up Brandon Griffin on LinkedIn and try to reach him at the show or any show, in the future. I think you will be truly encouraged by what he has to share.
All right. Appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.